That's wrong. Everyone thinks they're going to.
Hey, we're back on The Reckoning here on the Real Talk Radio Network, and I am joined by Judge Matthew Thornhill. Is a name and a sign, a shamrock you've probably seen for a lot of years in St. Charles County, so I'm excited to get a chance to sit down with him, hear about your 2024 race, and then talk about a few of the principles of jurisprudence. I've just, from meeting you here and there, I've heard a lot of interesting things, and I think that judges are one of the areas, especially local judges, that a lot of folks just show up and feel woefully unprepared every single time when they see all these names on their ballot. So I'd love to get into that. But thanks for being with me, Judge
Thank you,
Thornhill.
Ryan, for inviting me. It's just a total privilege to be here.
Absolutely. Well, let me see here. Just run me through. I know that we've had you on a couple of programs, but I'm not sure my listeners have heard it. You're a familiar name to a lot of us in St. Charles County, but why don't you give me just a brief background of where you've been in public service here and how long, and then maybe launch into what it is that you're looking at here in 2024, this election, and just a couple points about that, and then we'll just kind of go from there.
Well, I guess I'd start and say I'm a lifetime resident of St. Charles. I was born in St. Charles and have lived there my whole life. Grew up mostly in O'Fallon area when it wasn't kind of what it is now. It's changed a lot. I grew up right off of Mexico Road when it's still dead-ended at Highway K, and there was just a water treatment plant there and a three-way stop, and you could drive all the way to Harvester in about 9 minutes with a blinking yellow light at Highway N. It's just a totally different community now than when I grew up there. And I've lived there my whole life. I graduated from St. Dominic High School locally. I went to law school eventually at Notre Dame, graduated there in 1993, began working as an assistant prosecutor for the county, did that for 13 years, had what I consider to be a successful career. I tried a lot of jury trials as a prosecuting attorney, which some people may go, well, how does that happen? It means that someone is charged with a crime and they come in and ask for a recommendation from the prosecutor, and you make one and they say, well, we don't accept that. We want it to be easier on them. We don't think they deserve whatever you're asking for. And so when you end up going to jury trial as a prosecutor, it means you were tough on crime and that you did not accept giving away the store, essentially. And so I tried 65 jury trials over 13 years, won probably 90% of them, which means that I was capable. I understood the value of the case. I knew that I could make it. And we eventually, in all those cases, got exactly what we asked for. We didn't get less than what we asked for. So once back in 2006, I was elected to Associate Circuit Judge, which is the lower of the two local levels of judges. You have Associate Circuit Judges that are the lower of the two, and then there's something called Circuit Judge, which is a higher level. That's what I'm running for this time. Since I've been an Associate Circuit Judge for the last 17 years, 17 and a half really now, I've tried thousands of cases, thousands. You do rent and possession, you do credit cards, you do, I was in family court. We did divorces and custody matters quite often. So I have an extensive amount of trials. Most of those trials end up being tried directly to me as a judge, that the parties come in and they sit down and they start presenting their evidence, and it's up to me to just decide what to do. There is a much smaller percentage, and it always is kind of like this at the lower level, of jury trials. There's been at least 25 of those since I've been a judge, which means that the jury comes in, the lawyers pick the jury, and they sit down and they hear the case. They make the decision, and they're instructed with standard instructions. And so I have extensive experience both as a litigator, both as a judge, and I'm asking the voters now to vote for me in 2024 to give me the job of circuit judge.
Well, and that's, I think a lot of folks get a very strange picture in their mind because they see courtroom dramas and then, they hear certain terms and pull it out, voir dire, one of the things that we all hear, jury selection, but these are not necessarily accurate representations of often what it looks like, especially in local courts when you're getting down to it. At the county level, I think that this is where people come in and kind of blank and say, okay, I'm seeing circuit judge and associate circuit judge, and everyone kind of panics and doesn't realize what the different levels are and how it works. So, I actually heard a really interesting, I'd encourage everyone, by the way, JudgeThornhill2024.com.
Yes.
You've got a lot of good information on there, a couple of long-form interviews as well, and a lot of information on your background. But I heard a really neat, just something in a conversation you were having with someone else when I was in the other day about how would you recommend, if people are looking at your record, at your opponent's records, but all of the circuit judges, how in the world can we go and look? Some people have websites, but how do I look at a record without a voting record per se? I know how to do this with legislators. How am I going to evaluate the job that a judge has done? Because political speeches don't really matter for legislators either. I want to know what you've done. How do I go and look that up for my local judge? What would you recommend?
It's very difficult, Ryan. It's very difficult. Because even my website, which of course we just cited it, and everybody else's website, which is primarily how you get information about judicial candidates, is kind of their own advertising. And that they're making a pitch and they put what they would like, what they believe is their best stuff on their website. What I recommend people do is look up at the election authority what judges are on the ballot, if there are judges that are currently serving. And I encourage people to look on CaseNet to see when they're going to be in the building, when they're going to be litigating something. And just go down unannounced. They'll let you in the building and ask where they are and go sit in there and watch them. I promise you that in less than 15 minutes, you will know whether or not you want to be in front of the person, the judge, he or she. You'll see the way they relate to people. Do they respect them? Do they listen to them? Do they treat them the way they probably want to be treated? Is any of that stuff real? If it's real, then you'd say, that's the person I'd like to vote for. You'll see, though, unfortunately, I think, in this career or this profession, that you can go watch people and you'll find them to be arrogant. You'll find them to be condescending. You'll find them to say things like, I don't have time for this, which from my standpoint, I think, well, what in the world do you have time for? If this is what you got elected or you asked to be elected to do. And we are in a service industry, and you should be able to see whether the person who you're evaluating as a visitor, it looks like they're actually serving anyone other than themselves. And you will be able to tell very quickly whether that's true. It's much harder when people are not currently judges and they're running to try to become judges. That is almost impossible for you to get that information. All you end up having is a website and maybe, just maybe, an opportunity to meet them in person in some political forum. But very rarely will you have a whole lot of information, and that's across the board. You're just not going to have it.
Yeah, and I mean, to your point, the flavor of jurisprudence, the idea of jurisprudence that Americans have seen in 2024 has been largely negative, because we're hearing, with top to bottom, state courts, federal courts, from New York to Georgia and beyond, there is a lot of focus now as lawfare, our new phrase has come across. But the interesting thing, it's not just the abuse of prosecutors dragging people into court and beating them over the head with lawsuits. We have now started to see, especially in New York, at least in my opinion, judges who are, to your point, we're not behaving in an unbiased manner. I am the person to preside over this fairly to see justice done. We see an opinion very quickly being inserted in. Do you think that our crown jewel, the American justice system, is really teetering? Is it something that can come back? Can we use the local system, the local judicial system, to start to instill confidence in people again? Because that's all we see on the cable news is all of these terrible horror stories, but then they go out and can't find any information about the local judge. What do you think? What's your take on it?
It can certainly come back. I don't argue with you, Ryan, that there's some problems here that are very evident. One of the things that goes on when you're a judge is there is this idea of recusing yourself, which means that you say, it isn't that you couldn't be fair. It's just that people might not think you can be. They might not think. And so it's the impression that you can't be a fair judge. And so even if you walk in and say, well, I can hear this thing, no problemo. But if it would look like you can't, then you say, but I'll recuse myself, I'll step out, and I'll give it to somebody else so that that wrong impression won't have a potential to be there. You want the system to look like it works. And when you see judges who actually show definite bias, show through prior conduct that they have already drawn conclusions, that they've prejudged the case, there's no way people that watch it can say this person could be fair. They weren't fair from the whistle, and they should have recused themselves. In the case, one of the cases, there was a request by Trump's team that the judge recuse himself, step out, because he so clearly had bias. And he said, I refuse to do that. The minute that happens, it sends the message to people that the system isn't fair and that a judge who is biased can take over the case and make it go the direction he wants, whether it's fair or not. So the idea would be that if it's going to come back, there in every state, there is going to be a review of judges through some sort of a board. And if judges are clearly doing things that make the judiciary look unfair, they just have to be disciplined. They should be stopped by Supreme Courts. They should be stopped by their ethics commission, whatever that is. And if they're not, they're just green-lighting the whole thing to look like it doesn't work for the public anymore.
Yeah. Now, what would you say? And again, I know that we're talking about lofty things here, not the St. Charles County Circuit Court, but I so appreciate, because again, if this is the only glimpse that people are getting into the justice system,
it's what people see, right?
Hearing your opinion is, I think, a great window into kind of understanding, who you are and what you're going to do with that job, which was likely, if any of us end up in court, we're going to be in your courtroom, not these guys in New York.
That's right. You're going to be in one like mine for sure.
Right. So what would you say to some of the calls? We've seen the left abuse recusals, trying to get conservatives. I know that, this is not necessarily a judge, but we got Jeff Sessions to immediately recuse himself right after he walked into the Attorney General's office. We see this over and over again. The Supreme Court justices, you should recuse yourself because your wife or spouse or this or that. What would you say to that?
I would say that there is a point that judges have to say, I was elected to do this job and I am going to do it, okay? Or I was appointed to do this job. And there has to be a point where you can't allow fear to control whether you're going to hear it. But again, there's a tension there that you're obviously highlighting, that if someone says that you can't be fair, then you're going to have to prove it. In political realms all the time, especially you hear people make comments about a candidate or something, and they'll make some general remark like, this person is going to do this or he's going to do that, or she is. But the most important thing anybody can ask is, well, give me an example of that. Why? What is the specific thing that you're basing that on? Just saying you don't think I can be fair. If I am telling you I can be, what is the example that you have of a case in which I wasn't fair? And give me the data on that in like real time, as opposed to just making general character remarks. You'll always see, and I believe it's true, when you're talking about certain political types of people, they will always just make general statements about how a person is this or a person, but they can't find any specific example of how the person has ruled in a way that wasn't righteous to begin with. And so that would be the thing that I've said. People will say something to me like, well, there's some other candidate that's going to be better on this issue than you. And then the only thing I can say is, well, give me an example of why you think that. What is this? What case are you referring to? And you know what I've always heard is, I don't really have one. Okay? I don't really have one that I can specifically point to as to why I believe you're going to do something that makes you less desirable as a judge. It really is a question of say, well, then prove it. Okay, that's what we do in court, isn't it?
Yeah,
if you are going to make a claim, you got to come into court and prove it, right? And so if someone's going to make an allegation like that and the judge disputes it and they believe they're only being, I guess you'd say, played, right, to try to get out of the case because it's they believe they're going to rule contrary to what they want, right? That's the idea. This person has clearly got a very defined sort of judicial philosophy, and I can look at them and tell that's where this is going to go. And I don't want them, but I have to ask him to recuse himself or say, I think you're biased. Then you should just say, well, then give me the specific. Give me the example of why that is the case.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and you just said it. It's political. It's very odd because you're running in a political race. You have to politically get elected, but you're being a part of not the political system, the judicial system. Really a different side. So, I mean, with that in mind, you've got challengers on the ballot here in the primary in August. What would you say? What's the number one reason our listeners should consider you over others as far as circuit judge for them in St. Charles County?
Well, I don't think it's about drawing comparisons as much. Okay, I will say that I have more experience than them. I've been a judge longer. I have a lot more experience in the things that circuit judges do. In fact, last year I closed more circuit cases because they assigned them to me than any of the circuit judges in the building. And I did it 3 days a week when they do it 5 days a week. I did 2 other days where I did associate cases. So I have all the experience to give people confidence. I have the trial experience so that people can say, this guy can hold a trial together. But I will tell you, and I will make this promise to you, Ryan, if you come to court with me, I will always exceed your expectations. If you thought you were only going to get your groceries bagged, I'll walk them to your car. How about that?
I like it. There you go. He's going to bag your groceries and walk them to the car too, folks. JudgeThornhill2024.com. Great conversation there about the judiciary, and I appreciate you, sir. We wish you all the best in your run.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Ryan.
Absolutely. Thanks, sir.
I really appreciate the opportunity to meet your listeners.
Absolutely. Look forward to it. We'll talk to you again soon, folks. Stick around. We got the last couple minutes of The Reckoning coming up here on the other side of the break. We'll be right back.